Painting and Travel's next port of call, St. Augustine, Florida. Sarah goes aboard the Galeon to learn its history. While using oils, Roger provides step-by-step instruction for creating the magnificent vessel on canvas.
I want to introduce you to a special guest. Right behind me, this is El Galeon, and it's come all the way from Spain. It's built to look like a 16th century Spanish galleon, and it was designed to bring the explorers with their supplies to the New World. Later, I'm going to go on board and I'll introduce you to Captain General Pedro Menéndez.
I'm going to do a painting of this ship, but I want to do it from the bow. And the reason we're out here on a small boat is when I do the painting in the studio, I want to get the look of the ship from down at a low angle. That will make the ship look a lot more powerful, a lot more interesting.
We're really lucky to come out here this morning. The harbor master has given us a lift, and so we can get an up-close look.
Today I'm going to paint this magnificent ship. It's a 16th century Spanish galleon. We'll learn more about it in a little while, but right now I'm going to get started with the painting. I'm using oil paints today, and I'm painting on stretched canvas, a linen canvas. Earlier I took some acrylics and put some burnt sienna and burnt umber on this, wiped it around just to get rid of my white on the canvas. It's much easier to start a painting by not having all that white to deal with. Well, it's always intimidating to start on a new canvas, especially one that's a little bit large. But I always find that once I get the courage to start, all that anxiety goes away. But to create a painting like this, I think the secret is not to get hung up in a lot of the details right away. I'm going to try and get the big basic shapes down to begin with. I'm starting with my darks. And when I say darks, I mean transparent colors. I'm not going to use any of the colors that have white in them. If I do that, the painting might start to look chalky right away. Now, this ship that's been visiting St. Augustine here can be viewed from a number of angles. It's moored right next to a bridge, so I can get shots looking down at it from the pier. But I wanted this to look a bit powerful, and the only way I could do that was get in a boat and actually get out in front of it and look up at it. I'm going to take photographs of this with my video camera because it takes 30 frames per second. That means I've got 30 different pictures every second to choose from, so I'll get just the right angle, just the right position I want on the boat when I go back to the studio and paint it. Now, this, of course, means that the video has to be put into the computer and freeze-framed, so it does require some computer skills. But if you're familiar with video at all, it's quite easy to do, and this leaves me with exactly the image I want to use as a reference photo. I thought that would be the nicest vantage point because it just gives it that powerful look to be looking up at something. Now, obviously, I won't be able to show you every single stroke I put on this painting during the program here, but I'll try and hit the highlights and get the basics down. This looks like there's a copper hull on the bottom here. It's plated with copper. I'm not positive on that, but it certainly looks like it from the photograph. So I'll use some chromium oxide green and yellow ochre. Give that a bit of a greenish look. Now on this side of the ship, there's a lot of reflected light coming from the sky. It's almost the same color as the sky in one part of this. So with my cerulean blue and some white, a little bit of the brown, I'll put in the side of the ship here. I'll try to keep this as loose as is possible to start with. And one way to do that is use a larger brush. I certainly don't want to get into using a really small brush at this point. And by using a larger brush, it will just keep me from making a lot of small little details that really I might have to change later on as the painting progresses. Now I don't have to stay with all the colors I see in my photograph. I can use some artistic license and enhance some of these and change them around. I think I'll pick up some orange here and some cadmium red light. This is very warm over on this side. Oh, there's a lot of planking in here too. I'll grab some alizarin crimson as well. I won't blend all these colors together because I want this texture to show up in the boat. When I'm putting on paint in light areas, I want to put more paint on. I want the paint to be a little bit thicker than in the thin areas. I like the areas of light just to have more body to them. In other words, have more paint on a light area than a dark area. Now right on this side, it's catching some of the reflected light from the water, I believe. So I'm going to take my cerulean blue and white. Again, the paint will be slightly thicker because it's light. It's really a temptation to blend everything, but I'm trying to stay away from that as best I can. Basically, the big shapes I start with, and then work down to the smaller shapes, and then again, try and work from my darkest areas to my lighter areas. That's a general rule that works pretty good for me. Well, even though I don't want to work on a lot of detail right at the beginning, some of these areas are just kind of intricate, so I just have to deal with that. But I'm trying to keep it kind of loose. I'll load my brush up pretty good to apply this paint. These lines right here on this side are very cool. On the other side, they appear to be very warm. So I'll take my burnt sienna, yellow ochre, and white, load the brush up, and we'll make these a warm color. Brush stroke like this, you have to commit to it and then keep going with it. You might have to go over it a couple of times, but I don't want to do a line like this by doing short little strokes and trying to put it in like that. I commit to it and I just lay it in there. Keep going with it. Just going to continue to build on it, and the nice part is that as I continue, I keep getting smaller and smaller areas to have to deal with as this sort of grows. With my dark color again, and this is the bowsprit right here. Now the mast right behind there is slightly lighter, very warm color. I'm really putting a lot of pressure on the brush as I drag this down. I'm not giving it a light touch because I want this paint to get off the brush. A lot of areas, for instance, right in here where I'm working, I can't see too much of what's happening detail-wise there. So just a few brush strokes as to what I see and what's happening there is going to suffice, and maybe even be better than had I seen more detail than I needed. I think a lot of detail can be filled in just with the viewer's eye. I know that's sort of a cliche, but it's really true. An artist doesn't have to give the viewer everything in the painting for it to be a good painting. Sometimes a painting is much better when things are left out. Burnt sienna, burnt umber, some ultramarine blue, get that warm dark color going. And we have a spar way up at the top here where the sail is attached. I've put a bit of cardboard on the back of my painting here just so the canvas doesn't fluctuate so much. So this is kind of gives me a little bit of a hard surface. When I'm done with the painting, I'll just slip that cardboard out from the back. Now the sail, it's furled up here, it's sort of a combination of warm color and cool color. I think I'll start with a cool color first, which is the area that's in shadow. So I'll take some of my blues and some of the brown because it is very gray looking, and we'll scumble in some of these areas with the sail that are kind of cool. I keep looking at my reference photo all the time, of course, but parts of it like this, I have some leeway as to how these folds and things go. I don't want to get too hung up in the details of the photograph. Otherwise, I kind of lose my enjoyment of the painting if I do that. I really enjoy putting the paint on the canvas, you know, it's just fun. And if I'm just always studying the photograph so intently, it sort of takes away from that joy. Titanium white, yellow ochre, that should make that the lighter color of the sail. I'm trying to be loose here with this application of the paint. Almost looks like a big tea kettle, doesn't it? The shape of that. Well, I think I'll jump down to the water now. And again, I'll start with my dark colors in the water. And they tend to be very sort of a greenish gray color from what I can see here. Now here's something to remember as a general rule. A dark object will reflect lighter in the water, and a light object will reflect slightly darker in the water. So this hull being really dark here, it's going to have a lighter reflection. This is not the best example because the water is not very calm, and that disrupts things. But here you can see the light side of the ship and a darker reflection. The reflection on the dark side of the ship here is slightly lighter. If you're in the Caribbean where water is crystal clear, that doesn't apply. Right over here, the ship casts a shadow this way, very dark. Can't distinguish between the ship and the shadow. I'm picking up a few other colors as I go here. I don't want there just to be one color down here of this water, the dark part of the water. A lot of this paint I can mix right on my canvas without having to mix it on my palette here. And this is just a matter of putting on one stroke at a time to build up the painting. No real hurrying anything about it. It just has to be done a little bit at a time, and before you know it, it just starts to come together. Well, this is such an interesting structure with all its component parts. This might be a good time to go aboard the ship with Sarah and find out a little more about it.
Good morning, Captain General Menéndez.
Buenos días.
I understand this vessel is very similar to your vessel, the San Pelayo.
Yes, very similar indeed. And not only its shape, but also how it is operated.
Yes, and this is about 170 feet long, and yours was?
Mine was about the same length. It was a little wider, just a little longer. It held about 100 tons more cargo.
I see. And what kind of cargo did you bring for such a long voyage?
Well, we needed cargo and supplies for the voyage, but we also needed to plan ahead for the type of supplies we would need here to build the colony once we arrived.
Well, exactly. So there must be some of everything, some seeds, some livestock?
Yes, we brought horses, cows, pigs, chickens. We brought cured meat. We brought seeds of every type. We brought grains of flour so that we could make different types of bread. We brought corn. We brought potatoes, things that we could plant in the ground once we arrived here to sustain ourselves.
And then when you finally got here, what did you think of this lovely water?
Well, the waters here are world famous for not only their serenity, but their purity. In fact, this was known for many years as the Bay of Dolphins. This was a perfect spot for me to build a settlement that we could easily defend.
And St. Augustine is our oldest city.
It is the oldest city because this was the first settlement that we began, September 8, 1565.
I guess your navigation was done by the stars. With the help of the stars?
Navigation was done by the stars. It was also done by the sun. All of the navigation was done celestially. The compasses didn't work well on ships. We'd known that for over 100 years. Because of the shifting and moving of the deck, we had trouble maintaining longitude, but we were quite capable at measuring latitude.
Now I've noticed a few cannons around.
Yes, there are 12 cannons on board.
Some are below?
Some are below decks on the main gun deck, and we have some here on the weather deck. They are used to defend the ship against boarding or attack. This is not a warship. This is a cargo ship, a merchant ship. But it must have guns to protect itself because, you know, those pesky pirates, French corsairs and English privateers infest these waters.
Yes. Now, if you're arriving close to shore and you are in friendly waters, is there a way to signal that you're arriving?
Actually, that is what the cannons are used for. Cannons are used, 2 shots signal your arrival. If there's a battery on land, they will give you a signal shot. That's when you drop anchor and you wait for the harbor master to come out and inspect your ship to make sure that you are who you say you are, and even if you are who you say you are, to make sure that you are not carrying a bunch of pirates down in your hold who are forcing you to come into the harbor. A bit of a Trojan horse.
Kind of a security check thing.
Exactly.
Now tell me about these fabulous sails. I would like to stand here and, imagine what it's like to be under full sail.
Well, under sail, we have a forward motion of about 7 knots on average, which is very good for a vessel of this size. Now, under sail, it requires a lot of men to bring the sails down, to put the sails up. You notice all the lines running from the sails. Some of the lines are running rigging, meaning that they move, but a lot of the lines are standing rigging, meaning that they don't move.
And how do you change the sails?
It requires a lot of teamwork to be able to efficiently raise and lower the sails.
About how many people does it take then?
It takes at least 15 sailors for 1 sail.
Really? Oh my goodness.
And it takes about a half an hour to pull them up and about 20 minutes to pull them down.
Well, I'm just so impressed.
It's an amazing vessel.
It's quite lovely. Thank you very much. And if you would be kind enough, I'd like to see some of the interior,
of course.
Perhaps.
I'll take you on the Captain General's private tour.
Muchas gracias.
De nada, un placer.
Well, it really is a beautiful ship, isn't it? Well, I'm going to get back to painting this, and I've been working on the water here, and I'm using a small brush now. I've got this area covered, and to get some sparkle on the water, I've taken titanium white, Indian yellow, and some cadmium yellow. And I'm just putting some light touches here with a small brush. And I'll put some of that color over on this side, but not nearly as much, because this is the light side of the ship, so a lot more light's going to be reflected down here than on this side. Now, the fact that I put this coat of burnt sienna and burnt umber on the background really helps me at this point, because since the boat is basically a brownish color, a lot of this color can show through right here on the painting. It can just sort of bleed through in places. And instead of having a lot of white spots on my canvas that I have to color, I've already got this brownish color on here that reflects the color of the ship. So that works out nicely. Now, of course, I started with the big areas first, sort of blocked these in, so I worked from large shapes to small shapes. Right now, I'm just putting on a few more of these small shapes here to accent some of these ripples in the water. I think right down here, I'll take my titanium white, cerulean blue, put a few very light highlights, just some sparkles here on the water. Well, with a slightly larger brush, I'm going to take my ultramarine blue, burnt umber, and I'll put in these posts. Now, this pier is quite modern, so these are cement posts, but I'm going to make them look more like wood. So instead of making them look that cement color, we'll just take some of these dark colors, burnt sienna, brown, some yellow ochre, and we'll bring these right down here into the water, and that should give a little more of a period look to this piece. Okay, now I'll take this post right here, and I'll just take that color on my brush, we'll bring it right down here, make a little reflection. And we'll jump to the next one, use that same color. Now this is wet, this blue, so it's going to mix in with the water some, which is good. Don't want it quite as dark as the post itself. Well, I have so much rigging on this ship. I think the step I need to do next is put in the sky, put in this background. That means I'm going to lose all those lines of rigging. So I'll just have to deal with that later on and look at my reference photo to see where those appear. But right now, I'll put on this background, and then we'll let that dry a while. So then after that, we can put in more detail in the ship and then the rigging. I'll use my titanium white, some cerulean blue. It was quite a blue sky the day we were out here. Boy, and I hate to lose all these lines for the rigging, but there's really not much else I can do. Can't really paint around them. Now I want to be sure I use enough paint on this so I see the paint texture on the canvas. Anytime I paint something that's light, I want there to be more paint and more texture on the canvas. Dark areas can be thinner, but these light areas need to be thicker. Just makes the painting look much better. When the light areas are thicker, the dark areas can be a little thinner. Right down towards the horizon here, I'm going to put some yellow ochre in with my mix here to make this area warmer. Slightly warmer down here than up here. As the sky goes up this way, it'll get darker and bluer. Down here, it'll get slightly lighter and warmer. Well, I got the sky covered. There's a few more things I can do. One is to put this landmass back here towards the horizon. So I'll take my cerulean blue and white, add a touch of green to that, and I'll put this landmass back here. I want this to be very indistinct. Then I can take my sky color and soften this edge. And maybe I'll put in a few sky holes back here. Then I'll take a warm color and I'll put a line right across here to indicate a shoreline. At this point, I'm going to let this dry for a day or two so I can place those lines back in there, put the rigging in, and then finish this off with some more detail. Well, it's been a few days now, and this background is totally dry. I've put on the rigging again with the pencil lines and simply go over these lines with my oil paints. I'm using a brand new brush here. It's a small flat, and I prefer the flat to the pointed brush because it will hold more paint, and I can use it on the edge. And since it is a new brush, it has a chisel edge, I think I can more successfully go down here with this flat brush than a pointed brush. I'm mixing up my burnt umber and ultramarine blue just to give me a very dark color, and I'm adding white to that because some of the lines towards the back tend to be catching more light. They're a little bit more in the distance, so I don't want all this rigging to be the same value or the same size of line. Now some of these lines are very straight and others have a nice gentle curve to them. I'm going to load that brush up as much as I can. The paint is fairly thin so it will flow off the brush. And I'm going to start on this side of the canvas so as I work this way, my hand won't get in the wet paint. Now if I don't follow those pencil lines exactly, if I stray off the track on them, that'll be all right because I can go back and I can erase those pencil lines with a kneaded eraser since this blue is already dry. Now some of these lines are going to go behind this sail, but I don't want to break my stride as I bring that line down. So I'm going to make that line go right through the sail area, and then later on I'll just repaint this with some dark brown. I'm varying the size of these lines depending on how far back they are towards the back of the ship there. And we have some more straight lines here where the rope ladder goes up. I see I can do all of those with just one brush full of paint. I really have to be committed when I pull these lines down. I look at where I start, kind of keep my eye on where I'm going to finish, and just pull it down without any hesitation. I'll vary the color here, maybe make some of these lines slightly lighter with my yellow ochre and white. There's a few more straight lines, so I'll use my ruler for those. If I hadn't done a lot of this before, a good idea might be to take a piece of cardboard and just with the brush do a lot of practice lines, those curved lines. Now the rest of these lines look quite straight, so I'm going to use my ruler on those, and I put those curved lines in first because I don't have to rest my finger or hand on the canvas to make the straight lines. unlike doing the curve lines where I had my finger on the board slightly to keep my brush the same distance away from the canvas all the time. I think I'm getting it fairly accurate because I have some good reference photos to work from here, and I drew it in carefully before I started. Now I will have to wait for a few more days till all these lines and rigging are totally dry before I can erase my pencil lines. I'm going to mix a very dark color now and accentuate a few of these lines just to make them stand out from the other lines, to give it some variation. Now I'll mix up the color of this yard arm and the sail. And as I said earlier, a few of these lines went behind the sail, but I didn't want to break my flow when I put those lines on. So now I'll just repaint areas of the sail so those lines will look like they go behind this and not in front of it. But most of these lines do go in front of this. So I only have to do this once or twice here. Now with a darker color, I'll repaint a few of these areas of the mast. The addition of the rigging completes this painting of El Galeon. I've enjoyed the challenge, and if you are hesitant to try a larger size painting like this, I can assure you that after you start, it will become easier and you'll feel more comfortable with each stroke of your brush. So don't be afraid to give it a try.
For more information about painting and travel with Roger and Sarah Bansemer, visit paintingandtravel.com.